All right. Thank you for being here. Amanda Nicholson, writer, podcaster, copywriter. There on your Matchmaker FM, it says topics I'm always ready to discuss, books and feminism. So
Yeah.
interesting, possibly contentious. Should we learn more about each other first through writing and podcasting as to not spiral into some undue misunderstandings of talking about feminism, or start with feminism? Or we could just talk about The Walking Dead. Yeah.
I don't mind either. And I love Daryl from The Walking Dead as well.
My wife and I just started watching it again. Like, I've seen it the first time and she hasn't. And we're on like season, I think we're the first few episodes of season 3. And I can't remember. I stopped watching it for one season when the governor was in there, just because it was too ridiculous. Like, the amount of ridiculous bad decisions they make build up. And then I was like, I can't watch this. And that was back, I think I watched it the first time with commercials. And even if you could speed through them, it was still like, okay, this is arduous. So I stopped watching for that season and picked up the next one. I think that was the 5th season. And then I stopped watching the 9th season. It was either 7th or the 9th, when they got rid of a certain character. And I was like, okay,
Yeah, I know what you mean.
that's enough. Yeah. So that's enough. And then I started watching Fear the Walking Dead, the one on the West Coast. And that was pretty good for a season or two. And then it just got ridiculous when they got to the point where they were poisoned. And then the alcohol truck got shot up and they said they were out of it, but the truck was still half full. So that I couldn't keep going. I couldn't suspend disbelief long enough to watch the rest of it. But I know there's a bunch of different spinoffs. Have you seen all of them?
I did lose interest in Fear the Walking Dead after a while. I think it was a little bit after you lost interest in it. And I've seen Daryl, obviously, because I love Daryl. And I've seen the Negan spin-off because he's just so creepy. I've got a sick sense of humour, I think, because I just sit here laughing, and he's doing some of the most horrible things that people have done. And I just find it funny.
Yeah, it's that different. Yeah, I guess a different time and place. You got to embrace it or not. But yeah, he was probably the reason I stopped watching it the first time.
I mean, if he was sat here now when he was doing those things, I'd be terrified. But on the screen, it's different.
Yeah. And then I think what got me started back again was watching Norman Reedus's Ride show, the motorcycle one where he rides around.
I've watched
And
them.
then Negan was in one of those. So I was like,
Yeah.
oh, okay, I guess he's a human. And I know he's been in other stuff, and he looks like the guy that played King Arthur, but he's not that guy. And I was like, tried to transfer my liking him from that guy over to him, and it didn't work enough.
Yeah, I know him from Supernatural because I've watched Supernatural so many times.
Okay. Is he a good guy in that?
Kind of, but he's very narrow-minded and very focused on one thing.
Ah, okay. Very well. So, writing.
Yeah.
I know your first book came out in 2014, and then you took a break in like 2020 timeframe, and then came out with another one recently. I think, was it June 5th, or is that a different type, different date I'm thinking?
2nd of June, yeah.
Okay, 2nd of June. So with your getting back into it again, that during that hiatus time of the 2020 to 2025, obviously some of that time was used writing the new one, but what were you doing with the time you normally spent writing during that interval?
In 2019, I started doing copywriting, and for a time I was doing both copywriting and writing books as well, and preparing to bring out the second to last book. And then I think the copywriting just took over, and it wasn't until like AI came along and lots of clients started saying, oh, we're using AI now. And I just kind of had a lot of time on my hands, and there was things going on and ideas forming in my mind. And I thought, okay, I'm going to sit down and write this novel.
Okay. So copywriting then is advertising and marketing?
Yeah.
That's the main thing? Okay. Did that help you with your novel writing?
A little bit, because you've got to adapt to the tone of voice. So in some ways, it's a bit like when you're getting into the tone of voice of the character. But obviously, you've got to stick to fiction in copywriting, whereas with, I mean, non-fiction, sorry. Whereas with fiction, you can just do whatever you want as long as it fits into the story.
I found when I try different types of writing, it makes all the other stuff better, maybe more or less, in some ways, but like poetry helps with dialogue. Recently, I started doing some script writing, and that it makes me think or picture more about the setting. So it's personalized to me, but it's very sparse on the page. So you have more time to think about story and dialogue, maybe. I don't know. But it definitely helped my novel writing, I think, learning other things, even if you're doing it just as an exercise and not publishing anything. I think it helps. What kind of poetry background do you have?
I started doing poetry. Well, I've done poems most of my life, but I wouldn't say they were that good. But I started taking it more seriously about 8 years ago when I met my now husband. We were just friends back then, and he kept asking me to come along to one of these spoken word nights. And I couldn't imagine going along and sort of sharing my poems with everybody looking at me. And eventually I gave in and I went to one, and I wasn't going to read anything out. I brought two poems along with me just in case. And the guy that ran it, he said, well, if you feel like after listening to people in the first half, if you want to read something out, just let me know. And there was a guy sat next to me and he was giving me some advice. And he said, just take your time when you're reading out and just remember to breathe and don't read it too fast, because a lot of people, when they're first starting out, they just read the words really fast just to try and get it over with and then get off stage. So I did that and it went down really well. It just sort of went from there, and I started going to spoken word nights. And the funny story is, the spoken word night that I started off at, the guy left that after a few years, and now me, my husband, and another guy are co-running that very same spoken word night.
Nice. Passing it on. How many people do you normally get for? Is it a specific amount of time or
We
just
have
open ended?
4 minute slots, so if people go over by about 30 seconds, we're not going to drag them off stage and go get off the stage. But usually, if we go over 5 minutes, my husband has to get up and sort of tap his watch and go, you're going over like a school teacher. But it's
I like
really
that.
welcoming, and we see a lot of people come along and they're not very confident when they start, and then they go on to do things like we've had some guy that doesn't go now, and he's been on the radio loads of times, and he's headlined different festivals and doing all sorts of things now.
Nice. Yeah, 4 minutes is probably a good time for poetry. Do you do you have time after it to ask questions about it, or is it just read it and then get off and the next person comes up?
They get off, and then we have a break for about 20 minutes because it's in a bar, and the bar lets us put it on for free. So we try and encourage everyone to support the bar by going to get a drink. And then people will sit and talk to each other, and people might go up to someone and say, oh, I like that poem about whatever you were talking about. And yeah, I can relate to that.
Nice. So 2 to 3 poems an hour. Do you do
And
you have a lot of people that want to read every night or every time you do it, or how's it work?
it's just every month. So we have 4 minute slots. There's usually about 20 readers. We purposely book it more because there's always a few that drop out at the last minute.
Hmm.
And we have up to about 60 people in total, because a lot of people come to watch, whether they've just gone into the bar and heard that something's happening upstairs, so they go to watch, or somebody's reading that they know and they've come along with them.
Nice. That's a good setup. Do you feel like when you're writing a book and versus writing poetry that it's coming from a different place?
I think so, yeah. I think with a book you can sort of delve more into it, but with poetry you've got to sort of think, be a bit more vague or compact at least, or just focus on one specific thing rather than, explaining the whole backstory of everything.
I agree. It's good. So with having more poets scheduled than you would need because some people drop out, do you find that that's the same thing in podcasting where you have to have more guests scheduled because you have people that drop out?
Well, the podcast that I do with my husband and two of our friends isn't a guest one anyway. We just talk about the TV shows that we've watched. But my husband does one on his own as well, and sometimes I join in if it's somebody that I know or want to talk to. And I find that they're pretty good. It's usually about 9 out of 10 people turn up, but sometimes they're nervous, so we just like a little pre-podcast with them, and I think that helps. So we might talk to them for half an hour before and just say, this is what the podcast is going to be like. It's nothing to worry about.
How often do you do your group podcast?
We aim for every month, but we've all been busy on different things. So we haven't been able to do it for about 6 weeks now. And we're doing something this Sunday, actually. My friend runs a radio show, and we're going on and we're doing like a special podcast on Doctor Who. So we're reviewing Doctor Who on her show, where normally we sort of meet up on Zoom and review it that way.
Okay. What's your technical setup for your podcast? Is it a video, and what kind of equipment do you use?
It's pretty basic, really. My husband does all the technical stuff, and the rest of us just have like a normal laptop and sort of built-in microphone, and we have the camera on so we can see each other when we're talking, but that doesn't go on to the podcast. That's just audio.
And then when you upload it, is it going to a place that puts it out in a bunch of different ones, or do you just pick where you publish it?
I put it onto Anchor, which goes on to all the different podcast networks like Spotify and Amazon. And then my husband sort of puts a picture across it rather than using it as audio. And as a visual. And then he puts it onto YouTube. And as long as it goes under an hour, he puts it on Instagram as well. And we do get a few people sort of scrolling through Instagram who sort of listen to it a little bit through there.
Do y'all do clips for it, or just put the show out whole?
I did TikTok for 3 months when I was trying to promote my book, and it didn't work out for lots of different reasons. And one of the things I used to put on there was like little extracts of the podcast, and they did seem to go down really well.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that takes up maybe not the most time, but just putting clips up on different places. I'm not sure. I mean, I think they get more views than the whole show, but I'm not sure how, if that's an impression or if it's a person looks at it for a few seconds or if they look at the whole clip. I'm not sure how to measure all those.
Yeah. I think a few people went over and found the podcast on different channels and things like that afterwards, because I did notice a few more extra people in the numbers.
Nice. So then, this current book, what was your process for writing that? Did you set aside time every day to work on it with a goal of being done by a certain date?
Not really. I spent time on it, maybe an hour or two a day, and I was doing between, I think, 500 and 1,000 words a day, and just slowly watched it come together. And I didn't have any plans about when it was going to come out or anything, so there was no pressure. And I told everyone I'd stopped writing novels, so nobody was waiting for any novels to come out, so I just took my time with it.
Do you set goals of writing for a time per day or word count, or just topic, whatever you get done in that time, that's what you get done?
I kind of do a bit of both and just tell myself to start with, I'm going to do an hour, and then look at how much I've done and decide what I'm going to do next. And if I'm really into it, I'll just keep going. But usually I don't do more than 2 hours on it, and then I go on to do other bits and pieces.
Do you write in the same place every time? What's your writing setup like?
Mostly at my desk, but with earlier books, I was working in social media at a newspaper, and I used to write it all on my phone, either at break times or travelling to and from on the bus. And then I think I wrote like the whole of the first draft on my phone at some point, and I just sort of transferred it over onto my laptop when I got home and then edited it that way. And then another time I was working in a toy factory and I did something similar with the edits, and I used to print them out on paper and sit there sort of marking them off on the bus, a bit like a school teacher.
Nice. Yeah, there's something about I like going through the first draft or after you get the whole thing completed for the first time, whether that's technically the first draft or if you've gone back like over a page a few times and typed it differently and then print it all out and go back and look through it on paper. I like that way of editing better than on the computer. Not as fast, but I think it gives you time to think about it and look at it. And maybe that's just because reading books growing up versus reading on a computer or a tablet. I don't know.
Yeah, and it was a long journey as well to and from work on the bus, so I think it's easier to take a bunch of paper than take a laptop, because somebody might try and nick the laptop, but nobody's going to nick a bunch of paper off you.
Yeah, good point. Well then, with that, with taking notes or doing it on a phone, how do you keep track of it? Like what kind of program do you use to do your final draft?
On the phone, I was just using OneNote, and then I transferred it over onto my laptop, which is connected to it, and then put it into Word, and I just edited it from there. And then obviously afterwards, when the whole thing was finished as well, I edited it properly. But it's just putting it into the document and seeing that there's loads of mistakes. I went a bit OCD and I just couldn't leave them there like that, knowing they were there, even though I knew I'd come back and do a proper edit eventually.
Do you publish it through a self-publisher or do you have a publisher you go through?
So I self-publish it. I've had two small publishers, both of those shut down. One was a genuine one, and they just didn't know how to sell the books, but they meant well. And the other one was a bit more dodgy than that.
Dodgy. That's a good word for
Yeah.
some of the publishing houses. So this last one, is that done through KDP or some other self-publishing?
Food Drafter Digital, so it goes onto more platforms.
Okay. Is that available on Amazon as well?
Yeah,
Do you pick the size of the page and format all the margins and everything yourself, or does another company do that?
I do that. So I always go for 6x9 because it seems the most popular one, and the books always come out well in that. So I just stick with that one.
And the covers, do you do those yourself?
I do most of them myself. There's one that I wrote, and that's when I was working in social media. And there was a guy who worked there who did graphic design, and I paid him, and he did it at a reasonable price. And he did the cover for Not Human, and it's got like this scary picture of a zombie looking through a window. And I tried to get Amazon advertising for that, and they wouldn't do it because they said there was blood on the cover because the zombie was covered in blood.
Huh. Strange the things that companies have their reasons for, kind of like YouTube, where some videos they'll say, no, you can't say this or do this. And then you see other videos that are far worse. And maybe it just doesn't, it's not the word, it's the narrative.
Yeah. But I stuck with the cover anyway because I liked it so much.
Yeah. With the newest one, is it Death to All Men or Death to
Yeah.
Men?
Death to All Men. I had two titles for that. I was sarcastically going to call it Not All Men, which is what a lot of people online say. If you say, oh, like a man's done this, and lots of people jump on and go, Not All Men. Oh, I was going to call it Death to All Men. And I asked my husband, which is, do you think is the best one? And he says Death to All Men. So I went with that one.
Yeah. It's either an apocalypse book or a book about just killing men. I like
Yeah.
it.
And it's not really all men in the book that die anyway. There's a couple of good ones that are sort of still alive by the end of it. Or
Couple.
one, maybe.
Was it a catharsis, or was it is it satirical, or how would you
It's
classify it?
it's a mix of serious and humour, so it's more dark humour, but they are serious subjects. Because the inspiration came from it because I wrote a couple of articles for a newspaper in the UK, and one was about a bad date I went on before I met my husband, where I found out he had a girlfriend when we were arranging the second date. And the other one was about a friend that I had, and he got a bit obsessed when I was younger and started stalking me and wouldn't take no for an answer. And it got to the point where I had to get my younger sister to tell him that I'd died. And both of the comment sections were blaming me, saying it was my fault. And it just got me thinking about victim blaming. And then I just sort of started writing down notes for the book. And these women, they get fed up of how they get treated by men and how society blames them. And they decide that they've had enough. And initially, they want to just vent about men. And then they end up killing one bad man. And it goes from there and it gets out of control.
Yeah, I mean, there's plenty of people in the world that are, deserve to be killed, but maybe not something most people act on. I don't know.
I did try to keep it realistic, so afterwards the main character, she feels guilty about it, but she's also thinking, well, what else could I have done? And how could I have done it differently? And have I done this? Maybe it would have been me that was dead or injured or something like that.
Yeah, it's when you get to the permanent solutions for things that then you start to go, wait a minute, I could have done it a different way.
Yeah. I think afterwards you always think like, oh, that things could be done differently. So I just try to imagine like myself in that position if that was me.
When you talk about the topic of feminism, what does that mean to you?
Well, I've always written like strong female characters, and this book and the book I'm working on and the book after that are going to be sort of along the same lines of Death to All Men. So there's going to be a woman or multiple women plotting revenge against men that have done something bad.
So would you say it's more of a revenge book or more of
It's,
a
it's a mix of
empowerment book?
revenge and bit empowerment, and I've tried to do it so that it's not just like we kill all these men in the book and then we just all live happily ever after. There's some sort of repercussions, but I can't give it away without giving the ending.
Through all of your writing, do you have some, whether it's something you thought about before or not, some commonality from the writing from the very beginning through now and the stuff you're working on? Some theme that is the same through all of them?
I think probably strong female characters, even though I didn't realise it until I was about 4 books in and someone was interviewing me on a radio show and she asked a similar question. And then after we talked about the books, she says, I think it's a strong female character because that's what you've got in all your books.
Do you have strong male characters?
There is one book that I wrote called Hope and Magic, and there's a male character in that starts out bad, but as it goes through the series, he sort of redeems himself and actually becomes an important part of the group and helps them.
Okay. So then just, you could say strong characters, and most of them just happen to be female.
Yeah. And as somebody else has pointed out, in most of my books, somebody dies, but that wasn't intentional either. So even in my women's fiction book, there's a guy that ends up killing himself.
Yeah, that's life. I mean, that's part of life, is the
Yeah.
death part. So stands to reason it would be in writing. How do you get into that mindset of writing? Do you just have that specific time and place where you go and write and set aside for it? Or is there a, like, maybe not rituals, but are they things that you do to get into that writing mindset?
Usually the set times are in the mornings. At the moment, I'm not writing because I'm editing something, but usually the best ideas don't really come to me during that time. They come to me other times, like something will happen and my mind will just wander and I'll think, oh, if I did that, that could happen. And then it'll just sort of fall into place and I'll think, well, actually, that's how my character can get from A to B.
How do you organize, like if you're taking notes or ideas for writing throughout the day, how do you organize those and keep track of them?
I have some Word documents for specific novels and stories I'm working on. And then if it's just random things that don't fit into anything I'm working on just yet, I just have a folder on my phone that's named ideas. And some are just one or two lines, and then others are two whole paragraphs just describing an idea I've had.
Do you take those off of the phone, or I mean, those have to build up, right? There's probably 20 pages of notes on
Oh,
your
there's so
phone, just
many. Yeah.
ideas. Yeah. How do you go back through those and pick them out? Just reread it every now and then or some
But
other
it's
way?
saved under ideas, so I know if I want to find it, I can just search for ideas, and then I just scroll down and try and find the specific idea I was thinking of, and exactly what I said when I wrote it down.
Yeah, I have a notes thing called short story ideas, and it's it's probably 40 or 50 pages long now in the notes. Like if I were to transfer it over to Word and print it out, it would be that long. So I don't think I'll live long enough to go through all of them, but maybe at the end I can just print a book out that says short story ideas and it's just a list of ideas.
Yeah,
The
there's some books like that, so you could
Oh,
do.
there are? Oh man, somebody's already beat me to it. Okay. How can you tell a difference between something that is in a poem or something that's going to be in a book or a short story?
Sometimes I think it's easy to, but there is a book I brought out years ago, and it was called The 12 Deaths of Father Christmas, and it was flash fiction, and it was 12 pieces of dark, humorous fiction where Santa Claus dies in different ways. And it was a bit satire, so it was linked to like the news and things happen that are happening to people in the news, and that's how he died, and global warming and things like that. And it started off as a poem, and then I changed it to flash fiction, and I went back to a poem, and then decided no, it's better as flash fiction, and changed it back again.
Is flash fiction just shorter than a short story?
It's usually under 1,000 words, but a lot of people just stick to like maybe 200 or 300 words. And the guy that me and my husband run the spoken word night with, he writes a lot of 40-word flash fiction, and he's won prizes for it.
Wow. Okay. Do you keep separate notes for ideas versus poetry lines or character lines?
No, they're just all in the same thing together. And if I think it's definitely going to be a poem or if it's going to be non-fiction, I'll usually just write that by the side of it.
Okay. Yeah, I found with short stories that when you get the idea, you have to write it immediately. Otherwise, it just remains in that idea file and never gets done. I mean, you think about it every now and then, but think about short stories that it's an immediate thing. No matter what you're doing, if you're going to ever write it, stop right then and write the however many hundreds to 2 or 3 thousand words it is.
I usually end up writing maybe about 300 words or something if the ideas form. And then by the time I go back to write it, it's like, it's just sort of filling in the blanks. It's almost written.
Yeah. Have you gone to other writing groups besides the poetry reading one? Do you do any other writing groups?
Yeah, we do one that's not far from where we live. It's just a short bus ride, and we go to that every month. And that's a bit different from the spoken word because we're just sat down and we share our work, and people comment on it there and then. And then the guy that runs it, he usually writes down a few notes and he shares them afterwards. And then if we've got time, we'll write like a line or two based on what we've heard or what we're thinking based on what we've heard. and they call it a collage poem. And the guy in charge will read it out afterwards, and it gets pretty crazy because you don't know what the person's written before you.
So the thing you're writing is based on what feedback you got from the writing group?
It's like if the person next to you might have read a poem and they might be talking about a taxi ride they had and the driver got lost, and that'll be in your mind. So you might write down the line like, I don't know where I'm going in this taxi. But then the next person doesn't know you've written that line and they'll write something else. They might be thinking, I don't know, I'm hungry, I'm going to get some chips. So it doesn't have anything to do with it. But when you read it out, sometimes it feels like it was all written by the same person, but it's just a bit experimental.
Oh, I like that. That's nice. That's every now and then I'll do some poetry like that I'll talk in your words, where you listen to conversations around you and then just pick out the lines that are for whatever reason you pick that line out, and you can put those together, and usually it turns out pretty good.
Yeah. My husband and I used to challenge each other. So we'd see like random things, maybe a sign in the shop or something, and say, oh, can you write a poem about that? And then the other one would go, challenge accepted. And I came up with one called 40 Pence Adult Magazine. And it was a poem about the story of how it got into the shop and how it got donated.
Nice. Yeah, that's good. Where do you think that creativity or ideas come from?
I think I've always been imaginative, but I've only recently discovered that I'm autistic. So I've always been in my mind quite a lot and sort of thinking of different things and just imagining like what would happen and things like that.
Do you ever visualize creativity? Like I visualize the book writing creative muse differently than I visualize the poetry creative muse. So my book writing creative muse is just a guy in an apartment with, it's not, particularly bright, but it's not dark either. And he's just in a robe, eating some snacks, watching TV, waiting to be interacted with to write a book. So it's that part of me that's like ready to write a novel. Have you ever pictured that part of creativity, or what do you think about
Not
that?
really. It's more of a voice or a line that sort of keeps playing through my head, and I just sort of build. If it's a poem, I'll build the poem around it, or if it's a story, I'll sort of plot an idea around it.
Okay. And that feels, I mean, we talked about it before, but does that feel differently, the poetry version versus the book version?
I think it does. I think sometimes with the poetry, you can sort of be a bit vague and people might think it's about you, but it might not be about you. You might just be basing it on someone you saw when you was walking down the street and you think, oh, I can imagine that person doing this, and then you write a whole story about them, but in a poem.
All right. So you said you're working on two other books after the one that was just released?
Yeah. I've also got a novella coming out at the end of the year, and that's actually a nice one where no men get hurt and nobody dies, and it's a romance book.
Okay. Do you work on different projects at the same time, or focus on one and then move on to the other?
Sometimes I work on different ones. So there's the second in this sort of genre of revenge books that I was working on last year, and the romance one. And when November came along and lots of people are trying to write 50,000 words in a month on the same novel, I thought, well, I've written so much on it already. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to write 25,000 words on this one and 25,000 words on the other. And I was doing about 1,000 or so words on each every day. But because they were completely different genres, it was a lot easier than if it was the same genre.
Yeah, I can see that it get mixed up otherwise.
Yeah, the only thing that happened is there's 2 characters with the beginning name began with S, and there were a couple of times when I ended up putting the wrong name character, but it's easy to fix because you can go back and just click Control and F and find the name and then change it back then.
With writing, have you done any collaborative writing, written stories or books with other people?
I've written a few with my husband. We did one during lockdown, a poetry book, and we've done a couple of other ones. We did one called Run Away With Me in 8 Words, and that was because I challenged myself to try and write a seven-word poem, and I couldn't do it. And it ended up being 8 words, so I posted it on Instagram, and he was being sarcastic and did a response to it. So then I did a response back to him. And after we'd done about half a dozen of those, we said, we know we should do a book for this and do artwork to go with each 8-word poem.
Nice. Any longer work, like a book where somebody writes a chapter and the other person writes another chapter or anything like that?
I don't think I'd be able to do that because I'd want it to go in a certain way and then their chapter would steer it somewhere else and I'd be trying to steer it back.
That's the great part of doing that collaborative writing is, as we were talking about before, the different types of writing make your other writing better. So I found doing collaborative work that it makes me maybe not glad, but look forward to more writing by myself because
Yeah,
then I can go, okay, I got control of this to a point. But the collaborative writing is interesting because you have to fit in those other ideas. And it does
yeah,
seem like that sometimes one person is more of the driver of the story than the other person. Like I usually default to whoever's idea it was, as they're the ones that can guide it. Like they have that ultimate ability to say, after you've written a chapter or said some ideas on something, that they can say, no, that's not what happens. This is what happens. And then I'll go, okay, it's not my idea, it's their idea.
yeah,
But then there's other ones where I think, no, this is the vision I had for it, and this other way is going to mess it up too much. But usually I try to include those ideas. It might not be the exact way the other person wrote it, but to put it into the story some other way. And especially with script writing, I found that talking to somebody else about the script or them writing a scene or two on it can throw it off so much, but then you go, okay, how can I deal with this? And that is a fun writing exercise to where you can go, okay,
yeah. I didn't use
nevertheless, this was
I,
happening.
di- I didn't used to plan my novels very well, so I just used to have a vague idea. So I think it would have worked best then, but I've done a lot more planning now. So I don't think it would work if you've got like the whole novel planned out.
True, true. I don't know. Give it a try. And if your husband's there, I mean, you write a chapter, they write a chapter, he writes a chapter. You can do it on different. They have different software where you can keep it organized, and then they can also have access to it. Like Google Docs does it, but then there's some other programs too that are pretty good, maybe better than Google Docs. Or you can just say, here's a paragraph, and you can share the same Word document if you're in the same house. That's easier. But
Yeah,
I think it might be worth getting some insight for, even if it's something you never publish, just to get that experience. It's kind of like the writing group. It's stuff that happens that you don't plan on it, but
yeah.
it's the fun part of writing. What would you say, and maybe we talked about it already with the strong character, strong female character, but do you have certain styles in your writing where you could pick it out from others, like a certain fingerprint to your writing?
Um, Possibly because some of the stuff that my husband started writing now, and then it works the other way around as well. People that know us are like, "Oh, he could have written that," and then when it's the other way around, they say like, "Oh, you could have written that." So it started to sort of rub off on each other, even though we're not purposely trying to copy each other.
Yeah, I mean, sounds like a good setup for a collaborative novel. I'm just saying,
Yeah,
some different insights in there.
I think it will happen one day. It's just we're both working on a lot of different novels and bits and pieces right now.
What are some things you've learned from writing or that writing has taught you? And maybe it's easier to say it in like, what are 3 things that writing has taught you?
Hmm, I'm sure it's taught me a lot of stuff. I just can't think off the top of my head.
Here's my 3 and I've had time to think about it, so it
Mm,
might be, it's different. But number 1, you have to write, because if you're not writing, you're not a writer. That's the difference. Like, I think
yeah,
anybody can be a writer. It's just when those ideas and thoughts occur, if you don't write it down, it's just lost in life. So the other is to listen, whether it's listening to people around you, to nature, to your own ideas, to ideas from somewhere else, and then to think. And I think that's one of the best parts about writing is it teaches you how to think, because you have to put that stuff down on paper and explain it. It's not just something swimming around in your head and you're like, whoa, this is a reasonable way to think about this topic, but you haven't written it down. So it's not going to make sense to anyone else. And it may not even make sense to you. You just think it does. So you put it on a piece of paper
yeah,
and you go, okay, now does this make sense? So I would say 3 things that writing has taught me is to write, to listen, and to think.
yeah. I think a lot of the times I used to get ideas and I just used to think, oh, I'll remember that later when I get home. And I've learnt now to just write it down no matter what it is, even if it's nothing to do with what I'm working on. It's like one day I might need that idea for something.
Yeah. And how you were talking about where you put it in your idea thing and you note whether it's poetry, story, or whatever, that's a good idea. What I do with mine is I have them in, if I know it's poetry, then I just write the date and the time down and then the line, whatever it is, if it's just a line, a word, or a whole poem. And then I transfer that over later. And then if it's a short story idea, I have that separate file for it. And usually that's a book idea too, is if it's a book, you can expand it from the idea of the short story. So that goes in the same place. And then if it's lines from a character, then I usually just write those down. I don't put a date and a time with them. And then I have to separate them otherwise. But every now and then I try to do it every quarter, at least every few months, where I go through the notes on the phone, because now since you have the phone with you everywhere, it's all consolidated into there. Some years ago, it was across different tablets. You have
Yeah,
one like a paper tablet, one by your bed, one in your car, one somewhere else that you carry around. And then now, since it's all in one place, I can scroll through it on the phone. And if I use it in something like I'm writing currently and it's straight off the notes, then I'll either delete it from the notes on the phone or I'll just do the strike through. So if I ever need to come back to it, I can. And then I'll email that notes file to myself and then print it out. So at the very least, if I lost my phone, it's still in the email. And if I did something to it on a Word document, it's still in the email. I could go back to it, but
yeah,
I'll put it in a Word document, print it out, and then physically cut it into strips of whatever the lines are, and then put them into different piles. Like, these are lines for this story. This is poetry. This is for a different story, or this is a book. And then you can take each pile and deal with it, arrange it. If it's poetry, you could arrange it and see if it makes a poem the way it is, or take the pieces of it that you need and then save the rest. But I think that's that if you're reading the war of art, then what they call that is resistance. But it's just that obstacle of life of, first, to be a writer, I have to write it down. And then I have to organize it somehow. And then I have to put it into a draft. and then I have to go over the draft. There's so many different steps that I think that's why people don't write more, because you lose interest or forget about it along the way somewhere. But how do you have a system for how to keep ideas straight and then to keep moving forward with the idea of this is a book and now I'm going to finish it as a book, or this is something I want to write that I started, but for some reason I can't finish it yet because I don't have enough ideas or I'm not good enough to write it yet. And you have to just put that off into the future. How do you organize those things?
Not so much anymore. I usually just continue, and sometimes I've had to sort of leave like a few little dots if I'm not sure on details and then come back to that later. But like before I did my first novel, I had maybe 5 or 6 novels I'd started and never completed. And the novel Ghost of Me that came out in 2020, that was one of them that I went back to when I was doing my MA, and I finished that one off. But I've still got a few others as well that I probably wouldn't go back to because I'm just not that bothered about the story anymore.
If you ever have a story where there's a writer, they can be writing one of those, and then you can use that because that's the story they're writing.
Yeah, it's a good idea.
Or put it in a book called The Blender or something like that, with just all the stories mixed together. 4 different writers writing 4 different stories, and then they intertwine somehow. I did that in a writing group before where you have a topic and everybody writes a short story about that topic, and then you put them all together. That's pretty fun. And then if you can get those characters, I haven't been successful at this yet, where you have like 4 different people from 4 different stories and you collaboratively write one story with all of those characters. So each writer needs to know enough about the character of the other person so they can write about it. And then you do a chapter and give it to someone else, and they do a chapter with however those characters interact.
Yeah.
I've gotten a little ways into that, but never finished anything with it.
And sometimes I go to online workshops and they'll give you a list of words and say, write a story of maybe 500 words and include as many of these words in as possible. And I always try to get them in, but sometimes it doesn't always make sense by the time you've forced all the words into it.
Another exercise is getting old literature books or like school books, textbooks that talk about writing. And then sometimes at the end of stories, it'll have questions about the specific story, but it'll also have writing exercises. And I think that's, if you ever have a time where you've written something and you have this time of day or this time to do the writing, and then you have extra time, but you don't want to work on that project, then you just get one of those textbooks and flip to a writing exercise. It was homework before, but now it's more fun. That's interestingly enough how the world works. What's the best way for people to follow your work or to see what you're working on?
I think it's probably on Facebook. It's Amanda Nicholson, author.
And
I'm on TikTok, but I don't really go on there anymore. It's just occasionally I post on there.
Do you have a general website or like a author's page on Amazon or anything like that?
It will be on Amazon, yes, Amanda Nicholson.
Okay. So people can follow that. It'll have all your books together.
I used to publish as Amanda Steele before I got married, but there's also another Amanda Steele on there that writes werewolf erotica, but that's not me.
Guess there's a market for everything. What about with your podcast?
That's on, I think we've got a Facebook page. Yeah, Not the TV Guide. We've got a Facebook page for that.
And what's the name of that one?
Not the TV Guide.
Oh, okay. All right. Is there anything you wanted to talk about that we didn't, or any thoughts you have in closing?
No, that's it. We've covered everything.
All right. Well, thank you very much for your time, and I'll talk to you on the other side of this musical exit here.